Strategic Treasurer currently has 2 live surveys open through July of 2022. They're on different aspects of payments. Virtual Card Solution Survey with MasterCard is a quick 10-minute survey on challenges, expectations, and value drivers of virtual card programs. Global Payments with Corpay is one of our long-standing premier surveys researching FX, cross-border transfers, and new payment technologies. Please visit strategictreasurer.com/surveys to learn more.
Welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Treasury is responsible for protecting the most liquid assets of a firm. They own cash. They are the superintendent of payments and payment security. IT, or the CIO or CISO, is responsible for data security, security around the perimeter, and more. Protecting assets, whether it is cash, payments, confidential, and banking information, often requires multiple parties to be involved in the defensive activities. This may include direct actions and necessarily includes awareness and intellectual understanding of the areas where the battle rages. Today, I'm talking with Craig Jeffery, managing partner here at Strategic Treasurer, on the overlap of technical defenses and type of testing and monitoring, what it is, and why Treasury professionals should care. Welcome, Craig. Glad to have you on today.
Jason, it's good to be here.
You know, this is a great topic. You know, I think that when we think about necessarily security, you can never have too much. You know, whether it's in life, whether it's in business, and especially when you're protecting cash. Do treasurers need to know anything about penetration testing, or is that just an IT concern?
I think that's a good question. It's those two questions are not one or the other. Do treasurers need to know anything about penetration testing, about monitoring what goes on in the digital world? Yes, they do. Isn't that an IT concern? Yes, it is an IT concern. There's some overlap here, and I think that's really the focus of today's topic. You know, if we're to protect digital assets, cash, payments, there's elements about this that matter. I mean, it's foundational. Why is it important? Why are we talking about this on the Treasury Update podcast? When we think about the level of attacks, whether it's business email compromise, man in the middle, ransomware, exfiltration of information that might be related to banking, or attempts at the payment processes. You know, as a firm, we do business with insurance companies, banks, payment companies, you know, across the board, and they have certain standards with their overall, you know, network of suppliers, providers, customers, and they have certain level of expectations. This is not just how you have to do business, but it's also important to understand why this matters, because, you know, any vulnerability can be exploited, and that exploitation can result in the loss of confidential information. It can result in a compromise of a payment system, a compromise of credentials, resulting in loss of actual funds or trust. So these are all important, and the level of attacks and sophistication is great. And it comes to us not just digitally. It's a combination of digital, in-person, remote, phone, email. The surface areas of attack and the vectors that come into us come from a lot of different locations, and we have to be aware of them. Treasury may be more attuned to ensuring there's security of payments, that information isn't exposed. IT may be more attuned to firewall or elements about protecting email, but knowing about all of these things matter. So knowing about penetration testing, how that fits in, to some extent is really helpful for Treasury experts, not at the level that the CISO may know about it and what they're doing. But these are all really important.
I'm going to go back to looking at just in today's world and how critical and how much information is shared in so many different avenues in so many different ways. The world today is nothing but a big informational highway per se. And especially over the past, whether it's the past decade and a half, as technology continues to advance, for a lot of businesses, when you think about the types of layer of security that has to be there, to protect it. Because I think in any organization, I think probably one of the biggest threats, I'm sure you probably agree, is a data breach, right? And we've seen it happen, multiple times or none, and there's no necessarily any organization that can say, hey, I think we've done enough, we're good. You've got to constantly evolve. And there's tons of examples we could probably go through if we had more time. But I think it's just more so of having that understanding of what's available out there to continuously look at how to protect your organization. So tell me about the terms and what they mean. You mentioned some scanning, testing, and monitoring, but let's go a little bit deeper into that and define those a little bit more if you don't mind.
Sure. So scanning or vulnerability scanning, we usually refer to this and think of it as you're checking your system for vulnerabilities. Usually it's an internal process. Your IT group or an external group may come in and insert tools or network sniffers, network devices to check for any vulnerability. So this may be data that's available and accessible. So it might be bank account information or social security numbers or any type of tax ID. So it may be looking for that, or it could be card information that's exposed, unencrypted. So part of it's looking for data. The other aspect of it is it looks and checks to make sure patches are installed, ports are closed or blocked or have certain types of activity. And so running a vulnerability scan helps you tell and be more comfortable from the inside out. That's vulnerability scanning. The second item that you talked about was pen testing. So penetration testing, you're using a third party who tries to find out and perhaps exploit any weaknesses that you have. So they usually want to know your digital assets, your IP addresses, your web domains, et cetera. And is there the ability to compromise any of those? And the perspective there is if they can compromise some part of the system, get in, they can then move laterally, compromise more systems, gain more insight, and then exploit that, either exfiltrating information or data, as you talked about, or compromising the payment process and getting funds out of the organization. So those are the top ways that this can be managed. They might encrypt data and ransom it, exfiltrate data, charge people for it, or embarrass your organization, or get money out. So pen testing is a third party who's checking those items out. They're looking at your web assets. Are your IDs and passwords secure? Do you block people automatically if they continue to try to brute force their way into your password? So they have different styles and methods. A current one that's pushed by the U.S. government, some of the standards there is, red team testing. And so this is where you give them access to credentials. Let's say you have Office 365. You'll give them credentials to your servers that they can see stuff and run tests and look at things. And so they can run scans, see what the security settings are, see if there's vulnerability. They can also come in if they know what your assets are. They can either discover them, you can make them discover them, or you can give them an inventory of your assets, your websites, your ports, so they know and they can target their automated tools and or programs they have to see where you might have vulnerabilities or where you can be compromised. And then the output of that is, here's a result of where your exposures are. They're usually classified by level of severity. They give you examples. They're oftentimes, they'll give you how to fix it. Is it a patch? Is it putting some code in? Is it blocking something, or turning on some type of security feature? So that's penetration testing from the outside and perhaps from the inside as well. Monitoring, there's different tools out there that allow you to have this, I'll call it year-round or continual penetration testing. And so these are services that will look at your assets, your everything from your domains to header records to your email configuration to DNS, your domain name servers, to see if all those settings are are set proper. Do you block business email compromise attempts by securing email in certain ways? So this type of monitoring is different from a pen test, but kind of a year-round continual pen test, as opposed to just having a test every 6 months or every year and a half. This is continual. And so you'll get feedback on where those exposures are. And this monitoring can be your assets, but it can also be your suppliers. It can be your customers. It can be competitors as well. So you can add that type of functionality just to be monitoring. Here's a key supplier. have they been exposed? Are they putting patches? And you can see scores, you can see particular vulnerabilities. And the key thing here is not that everyone has everything 100% perfect, 100% up to the second, but that there's regular patch cadences, that issues are being addressed in a timely manner, so that they're practicing good system security, good system hygiene from their websites to their servers to wherever they are on the web or the cloud. So those are the three types of testing and monitoring that we think about: vulnerability scanning, pen testing, and monitoring.
I remember a conversation you and I had. We were talking about, just how sophisticated criminals are getting, and even, not just necessarily your business functions or your business technologies, but also too how they're also, you were talking about IP addresses and how third party may say something to your house, for example, and have something in the mail and test it, whether it's you scan a QR code off of your cell phone, and that, could have potential impact if your phone is linked to your business intellectual property or other systems, and just doing those types of testing. And to be honest, I remember when we had that conversation, it made me think, now every time I look at my mailbox and I pull my mail out and I see this great offer, now I'm just a little bit more questioning the legitimacy of that mail piece. Or is it a potential where somebody is trying to check my vulnerability and, whether or not, what is my next action with that? So it's kind of made me more aware, because it's not just from a standpoint of, I know that our business systems are well protected, but I never thought about outside of this, how, criminals are trying to access information, because if they know that, hey, potentially somebody has a job that's connected to something or the other, or they've done their homework, and, as they've scanned social media and addresses or public knowledge through, county tax sites and things of that nature, you're accessible. And so it just made me more aware of that. And as we were talking about this, that's one thing that just came to mind, was that particular conversation that you brought to light.
Yeah, those things can make you almost paranoid, but the level of automation and sophistication is such that your company is being probed and targeted continually. And it's not because an individual is saying, I want to get after this company. It may be for certain companies, but it's automated. And so they can leverage tech to go after many, many more companies, find weaknesses and exploit them when they can. So it's a big issue. And if you ever, as those who are listening, if you ever have a chance to talk to your CISO or spend time in their data center or spend time in their security monitoring area, you'll find it very, very enlightening and a bit horrifying to see how many attempts are made. You can usually monitor where they're coming from. You can see how your systems are tracking them and blocking them out. And it's the level of not only sophistication, but how that's escalated over the years it's quite dramatic. And so it requires, strong defenses, but instead of waiting for the criminals, the hackers to find and exploit something, we need to be testing ourselves all the time and our assets. And that's part of the stewardship role, right? We protect the most liquid assets of the organization. We have to protect payments and provide payment security. There's a number of steps that are necessary to protect those items. And we may not be responsible for every single item. The CISO is responsible for certain things. AP does something. Treasury does something else. But as superintendent of payments, Treasury has to make sure that all those things are functioning reasonably. Not that you have to do all of those, just like a superintendent doesn't do everything. But if you're careful to understand roughly what goes on and what those types of attack are, that's essential for understanding what's needed on the defensive side to protect payments, to protect the organization's most liquid cash.
It's absolutely fascinating. And really, like you said, go behind the scenes and look at the war, the war room. What does that really kind of look like, right? And I always think it's like War Games, that old 1980s movie where you're watching like the military strikes and, what's a threat, what's not a threat. It's kind of what I picture, except probably I'm sure it's on a laptop or something. But you're absolutely right. And to see, how many threats really come through an organization that they got to fight off on a daily basis, and, what becomes the norm and what becomes, hey, this is an escalated issue of things we haven't seen, and how, it evolves probably on a continuous basis. But, I guess my next question on this piece would be, though, is why should Treasury care about what could be argued as an IT security activity?
Yeah, so that's a good question in terms of, we started off with the isn't an IT concern, or what does Treasury need to know? And this brings us back to that, is what is the overlap and what do we care about? So how do you calibrate that? So So you don't have to be 9 layers deep in DMARC programming for protecting your email activity. I had to look that term up, but it's, the idea of is you can't protect things if you look at things in a unitary fashion. You have to understand all of these different areas. If they're trying to compromise your system by the weakest link, there's people, there's structure, there's technology, there's systems, and there's controls that layer across all those. So if Treasury says, I'm going to protect payments only by understanding wire transfers or only by understanding how I encrypt a payment file that gets sent to a financial institution, you're leaving up all kinds of gaps inside the organization. You're not understanding how people try to capture credentials so that they can act as you. You might say, well, I'm not worried about me doing anything wrong. And that may be well and good. Your motives may be as pure as the driven snow and will never be compromised, which is awesome. But if someone gets your credentials, they don't have to have the same standards that you have. So protecting your credentials makes absolute sense. And that's really just the layers of security: credentials, surface area of attack, the structure you have for your banking services, the bank provided tools for protection, whether it's account level or transaction level controls, and so forth. Those are, Treasury has to care about it as superintendent for payments and for the most liquid assets, a steward of those, a protector of that, because compromise can come from every area. And so that means coordination with other areas: AP, payroll, IT, your data protection area or group, as they're different. Certainly talking with your CISO if you have a chief information security officer. This is important because you can't just say I'm only focused on protecting one aspect. If we lose money and it came from another area, well, that's not my fault. That's AP's fault. That's the CISO's fault. It's whoever updates people from human resources who updates their credentials on our system. There's a shared responsibility, and then there's a superintendency aspect for protecting payments. So as superintendent of payments and payment security, you need to understand how those things fit together. There's critical information that's being shared. The battle is raging, and it's continues to grow and scale, and it's changing. And so staying current is vital. And we have to understand what the battleground is. What are those attack vectors? So that you don't have to be a master at it, but you have to know here are things that are being done to compromise our company, our systems, our data, our payment processes. And here's leading practices for defending those and making sure that we're aware of them and that our actions are making those patches, whether it's IT is putting in patches on your servers or you're updating your team with security training. These are all essential because you can't fulfill your role as owner of cash, steward and protector of the most liquid assets, superintendent of payments without doing these things and knowing some level of detail what's occurring around around your data, your systems. There's so much overlap. You have to understand more.
That's a lot of good information. And I'm sure the listeners are definitely agreeing how important security really is. And especially, what Treasury's function, their role, responsibility is in protecting the data itself and everything that comes with it, especially with payments and cash. Of all the things that we spoke about today, what would you want to leave the listeners today with? What's your final thoughts around protecting digital assets?
Cash is not usually stored in vaults. We're not handing currency around. It's all digital. So our digital assets are confidential information, banking information, personally identifiable information, and the method of communicating how we move and transfer value. From a finance perspective, I think if we talk about protecting your digital assets with vulnerability scanning, pen test, and monitoring, how does that correlate to something we may be more familiar with? As Treasury professionals, Treasury experts, I think about the scenario analysis that people do or run models to say, what happens if interest rates do this, or if foreign currency pairs move in this way? What will that do to our cash flow, to our balance, to the value of our assets? How will we respond to those items? That's part of it. That's a component of scenario analysis, saying what could go wrong, just like doing pen test vulnerability scanning is like saying what could go wrong, how will we know it, this idea of we want to verify our defenses are current. We want to verify that they're turned on, they're working. We're not using default IDs and passwords. And so the idea of using external parties to test and see if they can penetrate your organization, or they can monitor weaknesses, or making sure things are being updated. People, patches to your system. Those are all crucial elements, that we think of in the finance area. What if this happens from a risk standpoint? Price moves in a very different direction for these commodities. How does that disrupt our income, or does that create a particular type of situation that we have to address? Those are things we're used to thinking about on the finance side. But there's a element too that we need to think about on the technology side, because the exposure to these liquid assets comes through our banks, our banking structure, our systems, the processes we've established, and they're also trying to compromise people. So looking at that from how do I identify what my inventory of risks are, identify my surface areas that could be attacked or challenged, or controls that could be compromised, layers of security that people try to strip off. That idea of let's test these things, let's verify that they're working on a continual, regular basis as a process, not just as a single event or a one-time exercise. So I think those things fit with the security mindset and the risk management mindset that most treasurers have. And so I think it's just making sure that we have a more comprehensive view of the overall landscape. Not that we want to own everything, with regards to payments, the entire world, but knowing that you're the superintendent of payment security, that you own cash, that you're responsible for protecting that. And that involves coordination and a broader understanding.
Thank you, Craig, for joining us today. And we really do appreciate those final thoughts, as your words of wisdom are always insightful. And to our audience, thank you for joining the Treasury Update podcast, Protecting Your Digital Assets. Please go out there and like us on whichever medium you're using right now currently to listen to this podcast. We appreciate. Let us know how we're doing. And as well as if you haven't already, please go out to strategictreasurer.com where you can follow us through your media channel of choice. Have a great day. Until next time, take care.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.